Have you ever looked at your phone and wondered if it was broken? You check the volume, you check the battery, but the phone is working fine. The problem isn't the technology. The problem is the silence. The people you love the most, your children, just aren't calling. If you know this feeling, you are not alone. Today, I want to tell you a story about a woman named Eleanor and how she turned that silence back into joy. Eleanor was 65 years old. She lived in a beautiful house with a big garden. She had 2 children, a son named Mark and a daughter named Sarah. When Mark and Sarah were little, the house was never quiet. There were toys on the floor. There was loud music. There was laughter, and sometimes there was crying. Eleanor was the center of their world. She remembered those days clearly. She remembered being tired. She remembered wishing for just 5 minutes of peace and quiet. One day, she used to think, I will have time for myself. Now, Eleanor had all the time in the world. Mark lived in another city. He had a busy job in finance. Sarah was married with 2 children of her own. They were good children. They were successful. But they were gone. Eleanor's relationship with her children had changed. It happened slowly. At first, they visited every Sunday. Then it became once a month. Now it was just holidays. The phone calls became shorter. Eleanor would ask, "How are you?" And Mark would say, "I'm fine, Mom. Just busy. Just busy." Eleanor hated that phrase. It felt like a wall. She felt like she was standing on the outside, looking in. She missed the deep conversations. She missed knowing the small details of their lives. She didn't want to be a burden, but she felt lonely. One rainy Tuesday, the silence felt heavier than usual. Eleanor decided to call Sarah. It was 7 p.m. Surely Sarah was home from work. The phone rang 3 times. Then it went to voicemail. Eleanor felt a sharp pain in her chest. It wasn't a heart attack. It was rejection. She left a message. Her voice sounded desperate. "Hi, Sarah. It's Mom. Just calling to chat. Call me back when you can." She waited all evening. She checked her phone every 10 minutes. Did she miss the ring? No. Sarah didn't call back that night. She didn't call back the next morning. Sadness turned into anger. Eleanor thought, I raised them. I sacrificed everything for them. And they cannot spare 5 minutes for their mother? This anger was dangerous. It was about to make Eleanor make a big mistake. Blinded by her hurt and anger, Eleanor sent a text message to both Mark and Sarah. It was a long, emotional message. She wrote about her loneliness, her sacrifices, and her disappointment. She accused them of being selfish and ungrateful. She wrote things like, "I guess I don't matter anymore, and you'll be sorry when I gone." She hit send, and for a moment, she felt a sense of release, but it didn't last. A few minutes later, Sarah replied with a short, cold text. "Mom, that's not fair. I'm doing my best." Mark didn't reply at all. Eleanor stared at the screen, and the anger drained away, replaced by a cold, heavy shame. She had pushed them further away. She had built the wall even higher. She went to bed that night, feeling worse than ever, the silence in her house now filled with regret. The next day, Eleanor's best friend, a lively woman named Susan, came over for tea. Susan was a retired teacher, and she was always busy with hobbies, classes, and friends. Susan listened patiently as Eleanor, crying, confessed what she had done. She didn't judge. She just poured more tea and said, "Eleanor, I understand you're hurt, but let me ask you something. When you call your kids, what do you talk about?" Eleanor sniffled. "I ask them how they are. I tell them about my day. I complain about my arthritis." Susan smiled gently. "Eleanor, your life is your story. Right now, what story are you telling them?" Susan's words hit Eleanor hard. She realized that her calls had become a routine of complaints and reminders of her loneliness. It wasn't a conversation. It was a demand for attention. Susan continued, "Your kids love you, but they have their own busy, stressful lives. They're trying to build what you built. If every call feels like a guilt trip, they're going to avoid it. You need to give them a reason to want to call. You need to build your own life, Eleanor. A life so interesting that they'll be curious to hear about it." That conversation with Susan was a wake-up call. It was a painful but necessary truth. Eleanor knew she had a choice. She could continue to sit by the phone, waiting and resentful, or she could start telling a new story. She decided to tell a new story. The next morning, Eleanor didn't check her phone. Instead, she put on her old gardening gloves and went outside. She hadn't really tended her garden in years. It was overgrown and sad. She started small, pulling weeds from one flower bed. It was hard work, but as her hands got dirty, her mind became clear. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't thinking about her children. She was thinking about roses and lavender. A week later, Eleanor found a flyer for a community pottery class. She had always wanted to try it. Her hands trembled as she walked into the studio. She felt old and out of place among the younger students. But the instructor was kind, and the feeling of clay spinning beneath her fingers was magical. She made a lopsided bowl, and she laughed. She took a picture of it and sent it to Sarah and Mark with a simple caption, "My first masterpiece. It's uglier in person." A few minutes later, Sarah replied with a laughing emoji and a question. "What is that? Looks fun." Eleanor kept going. She rejoined her old book club. She started volunteering at the local library, reading stories to children. Her days began to fill up not with waiting, but with living. She made new friends. She had new things to talk about. Her garden started to bloom again, and so did she. One afternoon, her phone rang. It was Mark. Eleanor's heart did its usual leap, but this time it was different. There was no desperation, just pleasant surprise. "Hi, Mark," she said cheerfully. "Hey, Mom," he said. "Sorry, I've been so quiet. Things have been crazy. But I saw the photo you sent of that weird pot. What's going on? You seem happy." Eleanor smiled. She told him about her pottery class, about the funny old man in her book club, and about a stubborn patch of weeds in her garden. She didn't complain. She didn't ask why he hadn't called. She just shared her life, her new interesting life. The call lasted for 20 minutes. It was the longest they had talked in months. The dynamic had shifted. Eleanor was no longer the lonely mother waiting for a call. She was a woman with a full life. Her children started calling more, not out of guilt, but out of genuine curiosity. They wanted to know what their mom was up to. They started visiting more, not for a formal holiday, but just to sit in her now beautiful garden and have a cup of tea. The silence in Eleanor's house was gone. It was replaced by the sound of her own laughter, the friendly chatter of her new friends, and yes, the ringing of her phone. She had learned a powerful lesson. You can't force your children to make you the center of their world again. But you can make your own world so vibrant and full of joy that they want to come and visit. Eleanor's story is a reminder that our later years don't have to be a time of waiting. They can be a time of blooming. If you're feeling that silence, maybe it's time to find your own pottery class, your own garden, your own new story. Start living a life so full that the people you love can't help but be a part of it. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories that inspire and uplift. Thank you for watching.